From now on, this will be my home. Everyone else needs to leave. Wait, why is this happening all of a sudden? After the funeral of my mother, who we had been living with, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law directed harsh words at me. Despite my husband's attempts to mediate, their attacks continued. You're being deceived. Have you been brainwashed or something? Probably, this situation is because of your mother spoiling you. Ultimately, your mother is to be blamed for raising you like this. I could tolerate being criticized myself, but I couldn't stand them blaming my mother. I'm Kimberly, a 35-year-old married woman. I met Matt, who is a year older than me, at work, and we got married 5 years ago. My husband, and my mother had been living together, but a lot had happened over these 5 years. When we got married, I was working at a real estate company owned by my father. I had always been interested in money and the flow of people, so I studied economics in college and applied that knowledge to my job. However, at work, some people recognized my achievements as my own skills, while others simply saw it as my parents' influence. As proof of that, those who spoke ill of me often referred to me not by name but as the boss daughter. And my husband held a top position in the sales department of the same company where I worked. Many women showed interest in him. And being in a relationship, I often felt uncomfortable glances directed my way. Of course, I didn't believe that all my success at work was solely due to my abilities. I recognized that it was a result of the cooperation of those around me. However, I was troubled by the label of the boss daughter that seemed to stick to me in that situation. It was during those difficult days when I was working with these feelings. Then my father passed away. My brother took over as the company's president. Perhaps because of that, the criticism directed at me became even harsher. They made him president because she's a failure, I could hear them saying. I started being mocked as the boss sister more frequently. Normally, it might have just been irritation, but at that time, I had just lost my father. I was emotionally drained, and those words cut deep into my heart. After my father's funeral, I began to think about what I really wanted to do. My mother had always taught me to live freely since I was a child, but I had always felt that working in my father's company was the natural path. I was satisfied with my current job, but it had many elements that were pushing me to my limits. Continuing like this, I felt that something was missing to inspire me. After much thought, I declared to my husband that I wanted to become an investor. Matt didn't reject my unexpected decision and supported me. What also influenced my career change was living with my mother after my father's death. When I told her I wanted to quit my job and become an investor, she smiled and said, "You should have pursued your favorite path without worrying about your father from the beginning." It was soon after my father's death. Saying such things might seem unreasonable. I might be seen as running away from my colleagues. But before talking to my mother, I had worried about such things, but seeing her smile, I no longer cared about other people's opinions. Amid the busy days of funerals, inheritance, and moving, I embarked on a new start as an investor. Naturally, not everything went smoothly from the beginning, but my calm husband and mother supported me each step of the way. Using my past savings and the inheritance my father left behind, my investments progressed smoothly thanks to their support. After a few years, my income surpassed what I used to earn. During these fulfilling days, there were people who troubled me. They were my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. My sister-in-law, 4 years older than me and still single, had never seemed to like me much from the time our marriage was decided. My mother-in-law, despite being the daughter of the company boss, seemed to see me, a working woman, as nothing more than a rich family's daughter. Every time I visited my in-laws, they would wait until my husband and father-in-law were absent and make sarcastic remarks to me. Can a pampered girl like you do household chores? Housework is women's work. Don't make Matt do it. Mother, I've been properly taught household chores by my own mother, so there's no problem. But I also work, so Matt and I help each other out in our daily lives. He's willing to share the responsibilities with me. However, my mother-in-law never accepted that. My sister-in-law frequently expressed her dissatisfaction in front of me, saying, "I can't believe a woman letting her husband do household chores." And after my father-in-law's death, my relationship with my mother-in-law worsened even further. You have it good, don't you? Living comfortably on Matt's income alone. I've had to give up so much since my husband passed away. Why do you get to live freely, Kimberly? Mother, as I mentioned before, I earn an income as an investor. I'm not just relaxing at home. Despite appearances, I actually have less free time than when I was working a regular job. Still, you keep saying that while you're cooped up at home all the time. If you're so independent, you could at least give me some pocket money. You don't have children, so you're truly an incapable wife, my mother-in-law criticized. After my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law became fixated on money. She misunderstood my tendency to stay home as being unemployed and seemed upset by my financial stability. Nevertheless, I had no intention of providing her with money. My mother-in-law insisted that she could endure it, but every time I visited my in-laws, I noticed new luxury items. Even if I gave her money as she requested, I could easily imagine how it would be spent. I often received sarcastic remarks when visiting my in-laws, but my husband seemed unaware of how his mother and sister treated me. I liked his trusting nature, so I kept the details of his mother and sister's behavior from him. However, I had confided in my mother once. Why can't I get pregnant? I had asked. Well, getting pregnant in one's 30s is not uncommon. As I approached 35, I felt a vague sense of anxiety weighing heavily on me. Every time I visited my in-laws, my mother-in-law would ask, "When are you having a baby?" Her words, calling me useless, stuck with me, and I inadvertently mentioned it. However, my mother showed a surprised expression. "I had you at 35, you know? Don't worry, God will bless you at the right time," she said. My heart felt lighter hearing my mother's words, and from then on, I could remind myself that children are a blessing whenever my mother-in-law asked about them. After these tumultuous 5 years, I had finally grown accustomed to this life. Suddenly, my mother passed away. The cause was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. My mother, who had always been cheerful and sunny, passed away, and I sank into deep grief. Even my kind-hearted husband seemed shocked by my mother's death after living together for several years. With the reality of my mother's passing still not fully sinking in, the funeral took place. Many people attended the funeral of my mother, who had continued to work at the company my brother took over even after my father's death. Among them were my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. It seemed like they arrived when my husband had just stepped away from his seat. While saying, "We're family, so there's no need," they began signing the guest book without flowers or sympathy cards. Faced with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's lack of condolences, I could only stand there in bewilderment. However, when my husband returned, their attitude changed. "You must be going through a lot too, but I'm sure Kimberly is even more shocked. Please support her properly," they said, as if they were genuinely concerned about me. At that moment, I was already overwhelmed with responding to the words of other mourners. After the funeral had concluded, my husband, Matt, and I returned home. When we were hit with the fatigue of the busy days, the doorbell rang. My husband answered it, and there stood my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Perhaps my kind-hearted husband thought they had come to comfort me. He unhesitatingly invited them into the house. As my mother-in-law and sister-in-law sat in the living room, they wore ironic smiles while looking at me. And then, they uttered unexpected words. From now on, this will be my home. Everyone else needs to leave. However, my mother-in-law did not stop speaking. Until now, we overlooked it because her mother was here, but now it's just Kimberly, who is unemployed and is shut in. If you continue to associate with such a woman, even you will go downhill. We will live here together, so break up with Kimberly. What are you saying, Mom? At a time like this? And what's this about being unemployed? Kimberly may not be working outside, but I've said multiple times that she's an investor. I'm saying it now because it matters. If things continue like this, you will end up supporting Kimberly entirely. Until now, Kimberly was able to act freely because her mother was providing assistance, right? But now that her mother is gone, Kimberly will become dependent on you. As my mother-in-law spoke, my sister-in-law immediately chimed in. You may act like you're working and claim to be an investor, but aren't you just playing around with stock trading? I can imagine a woman like you being a suitable wife. Matt deserves someone better. Wait a minute. Why are you blaming Kimberly like this? She's earning her keep. Don't say she's just playing around. Matt, you might be fooled. Kimberly's mother coddled her all these years and may have brainwashed you. That's right. It's all because her mother spoiled Kimberly. I understand that you are trying to protect her, but fundamentally, it's her mother who raised Kimberly like this. That's the problem. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law said. When they spoke ill of my mother, my anger surged all at once. While I could tolerate insults directed at me, I would never tolerate criticism of my mother. Please don't insult my mother. I expressed my anger and stared at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Yeah, I bet you don't like hearing your mother being spoken ill of. Until now, she supported your princess-like lifestyle and allowed you to be unemployed and a shut-in. Now that your mother is gone, you're facing the harsh reality. My mother-in-law said, pityingly, while looking at me as if she had won. My clenched fist trembled with anger, but I took a deep breath to calm myself and tried to respond. However, before I could say anything, it was Matt who spoke first. Please stop, Mom. Don't insult Kimberly or her mother. Kimberly is working and not just staying holed up at home. She's a capable investor. Both you and I have always supported Kimberly's efforts. If you think she's just playing around, I won't accept it either. Matt, usually composed, raised his voice in anger. Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, as well as I, were surprised by this. My mother-in-law seemed unable to grasp the situation and began to defend herself frantically. Matt, don't get so angry. But it's true that your income has supported your lifestyle. Kimberly enjoyed a life of luxury thanks to her mother's help. And you bought this high-rise condo for her, didn't you? Matt, you deserve better. If you live with us, I'll take care of all the household chores. A small allowance should be enough. And, wait, Mom, don't you know? Interrupting my mother-in-law, Matt sounded alarmed. My mother-in-law's face twisted in confusion. What do you mean, don't you know? What? My mother-in-law gasped in surprise at Matt's words. This apartment belongs to Kimberly. She looked wide-eyed, unable to believe what she was hearing. Huh? This condo is Kimberly's. Didn't you buy it for her, Matt? When did I ever say that? This condo was left by Kimberly's father, and he inherited it. So, Kimberly is the owner. Plus, we split the living expenses equally. I don't know what you think, but in reality, Kimberly earns more than I do. What? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law exclaimed in shock. And no wonder, they had been criticizing me as unemployed and a shut-in all along. Meanwhile, Matt had excelled in his job, even becoming a department head at a young age. They never could have imagined that I earned more than him. My mother-in-law was overwhelmed by Matt's words and fell silent. Instead, my sister-in-law spoke up. Is that true? Being an investor, can you really earn that much? Just personal trading, it's hard to believe you make more than a regular employee. I can speak for other investors, but Kimberly has a keen investment sense. Everything she said is true. And seriously, insulting my beloved wife like this? Saying this is my house? That's not a joke. Get out of here right now. This is Kimberly's house. Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law appeared unsettled and made an even more astonishing statement. Wait a moment. We were planning to live here starting today, and we've already sold our house. What? We have just heard that they sold their house and could hide our surprise. You sold the house. Why all of a sudden? I wish you had at least discussed it with me. Well, we thought we could live here, and we needed the money. I quit my job, thinking that Matt would take care of things. So I can't stay here. Mom, can you explain to Matt a bit? My sister-in-law appealed to my husband while looking at their stunned mother. But my mother-in-law, still in shock, couldn't seem to recover. Watching this, my husband expressed his anger. My sister-in-law, at a loss, turned to me next. Kimberly, I'm sorry for everything. Please, I'm begging you, convince Matt. We can't go on like this. If you've sold your house, you should have a substantial amount of money, right? Why can't you manage with that? I coldly brushed off my desperate sister-in-law. In response, she became angry and defensive. Don't act so high and mighty. Just because you're making money from your investments doesn't mean you can look down on me. I've had enough. Please, just be quiet, Cess. My husband's strong, angry voice drowned out my sister-in-law's. She fell silent, and my husband shot her a piercing look. Enough about the family home. You can use the money you got from selling it for your future. Please leave this place right now. Saying that, my husband escorted my mother-in-law and sister-in-law out of the house and locked the door. For a while, we could hear the doorbell ringing, banging on the door, and my sister-in-law's cries. But eventually, silence returned. A few days later, we heard from relatives that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had moved to a modest apartment and were starting a new life together. It seems the family home didn't sell for a high price due to its poor location, but they were managing to make ends meet with the money they got. However, my sister-in-law couldn't find a stable job and quickly faced financial difficulties. She tried to rely on my husband several times, but he firmly refused. They sold all their brand name items and currently support themselves through part-time jobs. On the other hand, I was free to work as an investor without troublesome people around me. And next year, we were expecting an addition to our family. I gently stroked my growing belly, remembering my mother's words, God will grant it at the right time. Reflecting on it, I felt gratitude once again while thinking of my mother. My name is Jane. I am currently fulfilling my role as a professional while simultaneously raising my beloved only son, Paul. I have a long history of work experience and never intended to give up my career, even after getting married. Especially in my small but independent company, I have never faced a situation where my salary was reduced even after returning to work post-childbirth. During the leave I took for my son's childcare, I entrusted the management of the company to someone I trust, so I never worried about the management or progress of the business. However, the only issue that troubles me amidst my peaceful days is entirely different. It involves the presence of my mother-in-law. My husband Danny, our son Paul, and I lived together in a comfortable house. But soon after my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law suddenly imposed herself into our home. I assumed she would return to her own home after a short stay, but she chose to continue living with us without showing any intention to leave. When I gently inquired, "How long do you plan to stay with us?" her reaction was unexpected. She became emotional and exclaimed, "How could a heartless daughter-in-law attempt to drive out an old woman like me? After losing my beloved husband, being forced to live alone in my hometown is incredibly cruel." Danny, who had overheard part of the conversation, rushed to her side and comforted her. "Mom, it's okay. I would never kick you out, so please don't cry." After she calmed down, Danny took her to a different room. Once we were alone, he looked at me sharply and accused, "How can you say such horrible things to my mother? Do you not have a heart?" Misunderstandings might have arisen because Danny did not hear the whole conversation, but I had not forbidden my mother-in-law from living with us. As I explained, I was just asking how long you plan to stay, not that I wanted her to leave. He retorted, "Asking about the stay sounds like you want her to leave early. Can't you understand other people's feelings?" I regret using inappropriate words, but I never intended to drive her out. However, Danny, taking my mother-in-law's excessive reaction at face value, seemed to have decided I was in the wrong. I had no choice but to leave the situation as it was, making my daily life's small troubles deepen due to complex family relationships and the nuances of emotions involved. As a business owner, mother, and wife, I juggle these roles daily, trying to balance each. I wonder how long my mother-in-law plans to stay in our home. Asking her directly would likely result in her accusingly crying and appealing to Danny, so I hesitate to ask directly. Yet, when I contemplated how long she might stay, she unexpectedly announced, "I've sold my old house, so I'm moving all my belongings here," in front of the moving company truck parked outside our home, leaving me speechless. It was my day off, and I had planned to take Paul to the amusement park. However, Danny approached my mother-in-law, suggesting, "Then, today will be for sorting things out." This visit to the amusement park was a promise made long ago, eagerly anticipated by Paul, who looked disappointed when he asked, "Mom, what about the amusement park?" "Don't worry, Paul. As promised, we're going to the amusement park," I reassured him. Danny frowned and showed his dissatisfaction, asking, "Are you planning to leave the luggage unattended just for going to the amusement park?" I confidently argued, "Why should we change our plan for a family visit to the amusement park, breaking a promise to our child for sorting luggage?" I find such behavior unacceptable. The visit to the amusement park had been planned weeks in advance, with all preparations made for that day. Yet, I was not informed about the move, and when told today was the day for unpacking, I prioritized the plans already set. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law began to cry exaggeratedly, claiming Jane finds living with me uncomfortable. That's why she prioritizes her child over me. Hearing this, the movers, either feeling the situation was deadlocked or tired of my mother-in-law's exaggerated performance, quietly pointed out, "Unpacking can wait. Shouldn't promises to children take priority? And did you properly inform your wife about the move?" Upon hearing the calm comment, my mother-in-law blushed and felt ashamed. Danny, witnessing this development, did not defend her but merely looked at me intently. It appeared that Danny prioritized helping his mother with the move over our planned enjoyable family visit to the amusement park. In light of this situation, I decided to take my son, Paul, to the amusement park as previously planned. Unfortunately, this choice created a noticeable distance between my husband and me. One day, my mother-in-law said to me, "Jane, would you mind staying at home on your next day off?" I asked her why. "The truth is, I want to spend time with Paul, but since you always monopolize him, I hardly get the chance to play with him," she complained. This request came about a week after she had moved into our house without permission. She probably overheard my plans to take Paul to the shopping mall on my next day off. Suddenly, she forbade me from visiting the shopping mall, asserting, "Danny, Paul, and I will go to the shopping mall, so you should stay at home." Normally, there would be an option for the whole family to go out together, but excluding me seemed very selfish. Having witnessed her previous fake crying and such behavior, I could no longer trust her words. Therefore, considering it unthinkable to leave my child with someone I couldn't trust, I suggested, "Why don't we all go out together?" Although she looked displeased, she could not directly accuse me of being mean and reluctantly agreed. At the shopping mall, I began selecting clothes for Paul as originally planned, choosing slightly larger sizes considering children's rapid growth. My mother-in-law interrupted, "Why can't you choose the right size? This is the perfect size for Paul, bringing a size that fits him right now." Even when I explained, "Children grow fast," she argued, "when he grows, we can just buy new clothes. There's no need to save so much." I was dumbfounded by her short-sightedness. Selecting perfectly fitting clothes and buying new ones every time they become small is clearly a waste of money. We didn't have the financial leeway to spend money in such a way at our house. When I hesitated to purchase, Danny appeared and pointed out, "I support the family financially. If you try to save, it makes me look stingy to others." Eventually, Danny covered the shopping expenses for my mother-in-law. Paul wore his new clothes comfortably for a while but soon complained, "These clothes are too tight now," and stopped wearing the clothes chosen by my mother-in-law. She seemed to have mixed feelings about this change. Out of necessity, I passed the outgrown clothes to a colleague's mother I had befriended at the daycare. This act was well received, making me feel happy. However, the existence of the daycare seemed undesirable to my mother-in-law. "Why do you need to leave Paul with others when I'm here? Moreover, continuing to work with a child is not good for their education," she criticized. I couldn't agree with this point, responding, "The reality is, we can't make ends meet without my job," but she just snorted, "How much do you even earn?" I'm confident Danny's earnings surpass that. "We can manage without your help. Besides, you're probably a burden at work anyway." It seemed possible that Danny hadn't told his mother about my role as a business owner. His occasional bragging nature might have led him to hide such an important fact, perhaps to avoid letting his mother know that his wife earns more than he does. Faced with such a situation, I was deeply disappointed. "Actually, I earn more than Danny," I explained calmly yet firmly. My mother-in-law's response turned to anger. "How can you say such a thing? Looking down on your own husband and boldly declaring you earn more. Do you not respect your husband? You neglect your duties at home and boast about out-earning him. Don't you have any respect for him? Danny can manage perfectly fine without you," she exclaimed furiously. As her anger reached its peak and her voice echoed throughout the room, Danny appeared, asking, "What's going on here?" As if she had found reinforcements, my mother-in-law spoke with renewed vigor. "Hey, Danny. Actually, we wouldn't be troubled without Jane, right? It should just be you, me, and Paul living happily together. Don't you think our life is being constrained because Jane is here?" She said, "What? Yeah," Danny hesitantly but eventually showed his agreement. "Then the best thing to do is to divorce," she continued, and shockingly, she immediately took out a divorce form. It seemed she had wanted our divorce for some time. I no longer had any expectations for a father who prioritizes his mother over his child. However, I had no intention of giving up custody of my child. "It seems my presence is entirely unwelcome. If you wish for a family of 3, then I shall leave this house," I responded calmly. And without hesitation, I signed the divorce form she proposed. Despite forcing me to cancel our amusement park plans and insisting on helping with the packing, as soon as I started preparing to move out, she took Danny on a trip. Though she invited Paul to a trip, He had seen her unpleasant behavior towards me and still resented her for nearly causing us to miss our amusement park trip. He chose to stay with me, declining her invitation. Thus, Danny and she ended up going on a trip alone. I took this opportunity to move mine and Paul's belongings to a new home. I also left a letter stating that the responsibility for future rent payments, custody, and property division would be Danny's, as outlined through a lawyer. Returning from a week-long trip, Danny and his mother, unaware of the situation, contacted me surprisingly quickly. "Jane, why did you take Paul with you?" "Mom is worried. I'm supposed to have custody, aren't I?" he accused. It became clear at that moment that Danny had not yet read the letter I left. "Please read the letter on the living room table," I said. Danny replied, "Oh, Mom said she would look at it first. I've outlined that you'll be taking on $4,000 rent responsibility, that I will not transfer Paul's custody, and that we'll discuss property division through a lawyer," I explained. "Rent is $4,000, he exclaimed in surprise. He knew the housing was rented and that I had been making the payments, but he was unaware of the specific amount. I couldn't believe he was unaware of the rent amount while managing our finances. Indeed, this house was a rental, costing a hefty $4,000 monthly, and initially, I was against living here. However, Danny was adamant about living in this house, and eventually, we rented it according to his wishes. As a president, you should have no problem with this level of rent, right?" he said, leaving the burden to me. As a result, I ended up paying $4,000 rent monthly, with Danny covering other living expenses. However, he was careless with money and prone to spending impulsively. There was an instance at the shopping mall where, after shopping without calculating, my mother-in-law ended up short at the register and reluctantly called me for help. It seems this mother and son lack financial management skills, often spending on personal luxuries before covering living expenses. I had to cover the shortfall each time. I had savings for Paul's future and was putting my entire salary into our household, leaving me with very little personal spending money. Recently, I also had to cover the expenses and pocket money for his mother, putting us in a financially tight situation. But with the divorce finalized, I am relieved from the burden of $4,000 monthly rent. Registering the house under his name, which was done for his vanity, turned out to be fortunate. This allows me to withdraw from the financial carelessness of the two, bringing significant mental relief. "There's no way I can pay that amount. You've always been paying, continue doing so," he pleaded. "Why should I pay the rent for a house I no longer live in? I was driven out by your mother. The divorce is finalized, and there's no longer any connection between me and that house. Therefore, I have no obligation to pay the rent," I countered. So, please help me," Danny begged pathetically, but then it seemed his mother grabbed his phone, and her voice came through. "We can pay the rent without you. Even the amount you claim to have been paying is manageable for Danny," she asserted. "With a take-home pay of only $2,000, how do you plan to pay the monthly rent of $4,000? Are you going to use magic?" "That would be remarkable," I said sarcastically. "What?" came the reply. It seemed that my mother-in-law genuinely misunderstood Danny to be financially well off, probably because she saw him paying during their shopping trips, leading her to believe he was wealthy. I was just dumbfounded by this fact. I thought it was impossible for Danny, with his take-home pay of $2,000 and almost no savings, to afford the rent. Moreover, expecting them to raise a child healthily in their financially unstable situation would be difficult. Even without Paul's consent, custody would naturally fall to me, as Danny and my mother-in-law couldn't provide a suitable environment for raising a child. So, what should we do then? They were bewildered. If you can't pay the rent, you have no choice but to change your living situation. You'll have to notify the real estate agent to cancel your lease. The longer you delay, the more you owe in rent. I urged them to act swiftly. My words were met with, "Shut up. I know that much," from my mother-in-law, who clearly had no room for fake tears in this situation. After hanging up, I completed the move to a new apartment with Paul. This apartment is close to my workplace and conveniently located near shops and medical facilities. About a month after the divorce, my mother-in-law and Denny showed up at my company. They began loudly demanding to see me at the entrance, as reported by the receptionist. I was out having lunch with Paul at the time but hurried back with him upon hearing they were causing a commotion. Fortunately, there's a daycare within the company, so I could bring Paul inside. Seeing my mother-in-law and Danny waiting at the reception was a surprise. I was puzzled by their visit since the lawyer had reported they hadn't responded to our discussions. "Jane, can't you just come back home? We understand you were making the payments. Please stop being stubborn," my mother-in-law pleaded with tears, thinking her act would work on someone other than her son. She clearly intended to paint me as the villain. Witnessing her behavior, Danny joined in. "What do you mean by getting a lawyer involved? This is a family matter. Surely, Paul would prefer his parents to be together. However, a father who chooses his mother over his son would only sadden the child." I sighed and replied, "Now that we're divorced and essentially strangers, please communicate through my legal representative for anything." Danny, realizing he wouldn't get through to me directly, turned to Paul with my mother-in-law. "Hey, Paul, you want to be with your dad and grandma, right? Aren't you lonely when your mom is always busy with work?" Frightened by their words, Paul hid behind me and cried out loudly, "I hate you both because you're mean." His crying had a more significant impact on the people around than my mother-in-law's fake tears. Soon after, other employees came and escorted Danny and my mother-in-law outside, to my relief. Later, after notifying them through the lawyer that any further company visits or following us would be reported to the police, they quieted down. Subsequently, Danny and my mother-in-law abandoned their $4,000 a month housing for a dilapidated apartment. Danny's fate took a darker turn as he had previously bragged about living in a luxurious home beyond our means at his workplace. Fearing the revelation of their move to a rundown apartment, he quit his job without consulting his mother, leading to her fury upon discovering his sudden job resignation. As a result, they started working to earn an income, frequently blaming each other for abandoning me and Paul, resulting in constant arguments. Despite this, they are trying to make ends meet, sending child support monthly while working hard. Meanwhile, my business is thriving, and despite the absence of his father, Paul is growing up to be a well-rounded boy. Even without an unfit father, I am determined